The Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is live here with you as always. Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star. My name is Soren Petrov from Sports Radio 810 WHB. We're talking Chiefs football here. If you catch us via the podcast, you can be a part of the conversation. I already got a number of people lined up in the chat room, ready to be a part of the conversation. We do it Tuesday nights, 9:30 p.m. Brett Veach, we will talk about, said this draft will be the Chiefs' free agency. Can this approach work? Is this, plan one that can survive? Is it a long-term answer? Should the Super Bowl loss count more than the other 19 games for the Chiefs as they determine their off-season direction? Does Nick Bolton get a lot of interest in free agency? Will Justin Reid actually get a contract bigger than the one he's coming off with the Kansas City Chiefs? Who at the Combine look good? Who do we like as a fit for the Chiefs? Travis Kelce was ill. That, according to Brett Veach at the Super Bowl. Does that change how we view that? Jared Allen gets the call for the Hall of Fame. We're talking about it right now here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.
You are listening to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Chiefs on planet Earth, breaking down the Chiefs like no one else can. Red, Gold, and Bold is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Sam McDowell, and Soren Petrov. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Sam McDowell is a columnist for the Kansas City Star. Soren Petrov is the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. The Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are the hosts of the Best Chiefs podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Sam McDowell, and Soren Petrov.
Thank you very much, Curtis. We do appreciate it. We're off and running here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast. And, Jeff, let's dive right in. The draft will be the Chiefs' free agency. They just appeared in their third consecutive Super Bowl. They still have their quarterback in his prime, although he's going to turn 30 years old. What do we think about this plan? What's your reaction when you hear that those are the comments of one Brett Veach, who is in charge of this?
Well, it's smart because that was kind of the plan a few years ago when they had that big draft class that included Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis, and it paid huge dividends for them. And, for one thing, I think people, after watching the Super Bowl, and we'll get into this part of it as well, have to understand this team is not one or two big moves away from, unseating the Eagles, going back and winning a championship. They have to make a few moves, and they have to start building up more depth. Sam brought this up at the start of the season, and it was very, very prescient. This team was not as deep as we thought it was going to be, and that depth was tested throughout the season. And the only way you're going to improve depth is by getting cheap players, and that means investing in the draft. Ideally, you'd love to see them get more picks. That's the next step in the development process. But I think this is the right move. It's a smart play for a team that wants to keep competing for championships down the road.
Yeah. How about you, Sam? You okay with this strategy? Is there even a choice for Brett Veach? Is it like, it's nice that you said that because you really have no choice?
I don't think there is a choice, but also it's still the one you would prefer even if there was a choice. I mean, you rarely get great deals in free agencies. It happens. I mean, Drew Tranquill happens, Mike Edwards happens, in 2023, but you're much more likely to get yourself into a bad contract than you are to get some steal of a deal in free agency, because you have all this information on players, and it's not like it's typical for a player to break out in year 5 or something. And Stern, I mentioned this on your show this afternoon too, but the Chiefs quietly rebuilt their roster 2 years ago in the draft, 3 years ago in the draft now. In 2022 with that draft class, they need something like that again, because as much as the consistency has been Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, their coaching staff, their GM, Chris Jones too, they really retooled their supporting cast. And that's where they are now, because they've got a lot of free agents, because they don't have a ton of salary cap space, particularly after giving Trey Smith 23 plus million. Obviously that could change, at least in the immediacy, if you're able to reach a long-term deal with him. But regardless of all the other noise, the backbone of the good teams that are good consistently year in, year out is always through the draft. You have your franchise quarterback, but we've seen franchise quarterbacks, have these peaks and valleys in particular. And the reason this team hasn't is because it's drafted well. And these last two drafts haven't held up to that exact same standard, which means you've got to hit on this draft. And I totally agree with Jeff's point. If you're going to build through the draft, if that's going to be your currency for a team with quite a few needs, you need more picks too. And that's something they should consider going into the draft as well.
Yeah, that draft, they had 12 picks to start. They ended up making 10 selections, but they had 12 picks. They had the ammunition to go up and down. It's starting to fade as to what were all the reasons they had him. I know one was Ryan Poles, compensation for Ryan Poles.
Tyreek Hill gave him what?
Yeah. Tyreek Hill gave him a couple of them. So
three, I think, in that draft.
And I think that's what's amazing to me. Like, if you want the draft to be your free agency, and I think once you started down the road, that was a statement he made before they put the franchise tag on Trey Smith. So I think, probably in the back of their mind, they were hoping that a number would come out cap-wise and they would go down. They knew that was at least an option. So I'm not saying that, it all changed when Trey Smith got franchise tagged. I don't think that's the case. But I do think, you knew these things were coming. Like, if your plan, if your idea was, okay, we're just going to have to get it done through the draft, why weren't you getting more picks?
Yeah.
And I think that's and they are where they are today. So we can go back and, we can try to reassemble what they should have done in times gone by. I think one of them, they should have traded Trey Smith. I think they could have traded Chris Jones. I won't say they should have, because they've won plenty of championships with Chris Jones there. So I'm not going to try to say that but it was an option. And, you could have, maybe you have two or three players that collectively are much better than Chris Jones just by himself. There are options. There's the cap game and there's the draft pick game. But at some point, they've got to get to where they decide who they're not going to keep and they move, right? Moving Justin Reid with a year left on his deal, whoever it might be. If you've decided, you can't be getting to the end of the year and go, okay, now I think we know what we're going to do. Like, you have to have a plan 2 and 3 years in advance, which I think they do, but it's never included trading anybody for draft picks. And that's the only way you're going to bring out extra picks.
Well, it has once.
Huh?
Yeah. It did once. Tyreek Hill, they did.
With Tyreek Hill. But that was, but do you think that was their plan? Or do you think Tyreek Hill forced it upon them? I think it was forced upon them. I think the plan was to re-sign Tyreek Hill. And Tyreek Hill said, I want this much. And they went, we can't do that. And so then they went out and traded him. But do you really think that all along they were plotting to move Tyreek Hill? Their comments were that they tried to sign him. You can say that. We kicked around some numbers. I don't think you can take a coach and a general manager at their word. And by the way, I'll point out a good point. Ollie says, Snead as well. They did do it with Snead as well. That's a very good point. But that was, again, the franchise tag. I'm talking about go a year earlier. Like, first of all, I think L'Jarius Snead taught the NFL, don't do this, right? It blew up in the Titans' face. This is the move you have to make the year before you get there, right? You got to be ready to walk on a guy a year before. And that's what Tyreek Hill was, right? He still had a year on his deal, but he wasn't going to show up. Well, forget if a guy's going to show up. You got to move him a year before you're going to let him walk and try to get more than you think you will get in free agent compensation for letting him walk, Jeff. And I think if you're going to stockpile picks, that's the only way to do it, unless you think you can constantly have minority general manager candidates ready to be hired every year.
Well, and it's not just the Patriots who specialized in that. Bill Walsh, when he's with the 49ers, used to always have the mantra that it's better to get rid of a player a year too early than a year too late. And I know that sounds cold-hearted, but they got rid of some big-name guys, including a guy who ended up playing here for a few years, who were very important to that franchise history. But one thing I chuckle at is when I hear people talk about, well, the Chiefs, they just redid Mahomes' contract and extended Tooney and redid Chris Jones. They have all this money to go spend. Well, Yeah, they could do all that stuff, but that doesn't create a great situation long term. You don't want to be doing this every year to try to find a way to win a championship when, in fact, they just proved the better way to do it is to go get a lot of draft picks, get guys who are young and cheap, and make the most out of them. And so, yeah, I totally agree that, we had this conversation last week about Travis Kelce. Now, again, he's a different circumstance. But if you're going to fall in love with players and to keep them around and hope they're going to be at their best right up until the very end, that's not how the NFL is going to work. And in a lot of ways, Buffalo, who they beat in the AFC Championship game, is probably your best case scenario for next year. Where you have some newer players, some guys who are on the back end of their careers moving on, but you still find a way to have a chance to be in the championship game, have a chance to win a Super Bowl. That's what really is how it's going to look moving forward.
Yeah. Did they make a mistake somewhere else with the cap, Sam? I mean, is there something else we look at it and say, well, they shouldn't have done this? Is it, or does the fact that they've played for 3 championships, winning 2 of them, mean that all the moves we should pretty much look at and say, okay, they're right, and it's just about where they go from here? Or is there something we can look back and say they probably should have done this along the way?
Well, I mean, every team has mistakes sitting on their salary cap right now. I mean, the Eagles have a mess of a salary cap coming in a couple of years, particularly after giving Saquon Barkley an extension before he was due for one. Like, they've got a lot of cans that they've kicked down the road here. I mean, obviously, you look at Juwan Taylor eating up $27 million on the salary cap, and that's not a great number. You look at Mike Dana eating up $8 million on the salary cap, and that's not a great number. I will point out that some of those moves are forced by the draft picks that didn't pan out. If Felix Anudike-Uzomah was worthy of the first-round selection, if he played like a first-round selection, you have a very cheap starting edge rusher rather than an $8 million edge rusher who wasn't all that productive last year. So anytime I do look at salary cap mistakes, I think you have to trace back to the original breadcrumb and say what started it. And it does come back to hitting in the draft. And it's something that the 2022 draft class for this team has long-term effects for how good it was. The 23 and 24 draft class, if they don't improve, that's going to have long-term effects as well. It's the reason why when you go into this offseason, the Chiefs have more needs than they did a year ago.
Yeah, for sure. Jeff, is signing your own, though, the best approach? The fact that they are keeping Trey Smith, they are keeping a guy that they know completely. And by the way, who's very young. He'll turn 25 in a month or so, I think it is, or maybe it's a few days. Can't remember what it is, but he's still young. So the second contract figures to be prime years. I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees with the idea of keeping Trey Smith. It's just the fabric of everything that's going on around him and the position he plays is, True Player says here, positional value is the Chiefs' issue. Highest paid center, left guard, right guard. That's the issue here. That's the context. So let's be clear. We all like Trey Smith, the player, Trey Smith, the guy. It's the context with which you do it. But keeping your own is generally the best and most successful money to spend.
Yeah, I mean, every GM would tell you that. Like, what you're getting, the player, what he means. But just as that guy just said, that there is a threshold. Like, you can't fall in love with every guy who comes down the pipe that you've drafted. And really, they're holding on to Trey Smith because they went out and spent a bunch of money on 2 guys who weren't homegrown products, right? Joe Thuney is here because the offensive line was a mess. Juwan Taylor is here because the offensive line was a mess. So if you're going to adopt that idea, then I think you have to be consistent with it. And so the irony here is that, Andy Reid, when he was in Philadelphia, was notorious for getting rid of popular players before their time was done, of not giving in to heavy contract demands. He had routinely annual fights with people like Deuce Staley and Jeremiah Trotter and guys like Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor knew that they were going to be gone once they got to a certain point. It was expected there. And so I do feel as if some of this, as Andy Reid is older, he's not going to be coaching his team for a lot longer. Maybe he gets to 70. Maybe that's the dream scenario and all this. But it feels like some of these moves, especially Trey Smith, is more about let's just capitalize on what we have now, and I'll worry about whoever else has to deal with the problem after I'm gone.
I think Jeff makes a great point, Sam, because I used to talk to people over at Arrowhead who said, we got to be more, and this is when Andy Reid was running the show in Philadelphia early in his career, not the last couple of years, because things did change at the end for Andy Reid. But they're like, we got to get to being more like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They're a year early getting out and never a year late. And we got to be more like them. And then Andy Reid is not that guy anymore, right? Like, why the change? Is it because every year might be his last one and he's more focused on the right now? I mean, he had personnel control back then. We all think he's got the hammer right now. He doesn't do all the work that he did back then, but he's still got final say ultimately. What do you suppose changed him?
I mean, Trey Smith is more of an exception than the rule. I mean, Mike Dana last year was the first time that they had signed a Brett Veach draft pick to a second contract of a multi-year deal. Then they did it with Creed Humphrey in training camp, and then they did it with Trey Smith. I think that we had seen previously in terms of Chris Jones and Creed Humphrey that the Chiefs were willing to make an exception if they thought somebody was like a legacy type player, like an absolute top of the class player. That's where Trey Smith, I think, is a little bit different, because I think Trey Smith is a terrific guard. I don't know that any of us would call him the best guard in the league or even a top 3 guard in the league right now. And that's why this one did take me by surprise, because it's not a premium position. It's not the best of the best at that position, even though you said it, Seren. He's a great player. He's a great teammate. He's all those things. I love talking to Trey Smith in the locker room. He's terrific. I can understand why you want that person in your locker room. But I do think that I said this on the last podcast. I think the Chiefs got in a situation where they don't see a solution at left tackle. And they say, well, we know that could be a problem. We can't afford to create another problem this offseason. Sometimes that second box, as hard as it is still the right thing to do, particularly when you consider that right guard can be had more cheaply. I know it's not a great market this year. It is a pretty good free agency class for it. And we all talked about it. Like, you have other linemen on the roster that it's alarming that you don't think you can develop one of those guys into a regular player.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is interesting. Tyler says, is Brett Veach relying on Andy Reid more now that more of the people in the front office have left? Oh, maybe.
I think less and less every year that's the case. I think Brett Veach takes more and more control of that roster, even if I'm not going to disagree with you, Seren, that Andy Reid still, if there is a disagreement, might have the final say, but Brett Veach is making the draft picks, and Brett Veach is doing a lot of this free agency stuff to where I don't think this is the Andy Reid show that some people make it out to be.
We may see the 4 offensive linemen that have been drafted in the last 2 years make an impact for this team in the future, but there's no way you can sell that it's looking good now. You just don't re-sign Trey Smith if you have confidence, real confidence anywhere in any of those players.
Well, and that's why you have to trust your process, right? I understand how enticing it is to say Trey Smith is a proven commodity and he's made the Pro Bowl and he's been here and been a part of all this stuff, but you got him in the 6th round. It wasn't like he was like some no-brainer pick. You kind of, I don't say you got lucky. You found the guy in the 6th round. You could find somebody else in the draft again,
but they can't. They haven't found anybody else in the draft.
That's true. Yeah. We'll keep taking shots.
I mean,
you're right though, Jeff. I mean, I've often said, just 2 guys with Hunter Norzad and Kingsley Suamati is an extraordinarily small sample size. It does not mean you should not keep taking shots to try and solve this problem through the draft.
But but it does set up the problems that we've seen from this organization in the past. They couldn't get it right at defensive line, drafting Junior Ciavi and Ryan Sims. And, when you keep Eddie Freeman, when you keep throwing, premium picks at a spot and you don't solve it, you're not addressing the other ones. And I remember everybody kept saying draft defense. And I'd be like, listen, you got to do something on the offense because it's going to get old as well. And they crashed and burned and had the worst run that ultimately precipitated bringing Andy Reid to Kansas City. They're not all premium picks. There's a 2nd, a 3rd, a 5th, and a 7th in these last 4. So that's one of the things. But you throw in Felix Anudike-Uzomah, that is a premium pick. That is not really, doing anything for this team. Kingsley Suamataia is a premium pick. Wanya Morris is a premium pick. those are it. Sky Moore was a premium pick. Brian Cook's been okay, but that's a premium pick.
I will say every team has a history like this when you go through it.
They do.
Look at the Bears draft picks over the last 3 years since Ryan Poles got there.
But we're not. But the comparison is not to be better than the Bears. The comparison is
every team has that. I'm just saying every team has those.
They do, but then they hit late. Like if they're going to consistently win, what I've always said is first round pick needs to start right away. Second round pick needs to start sometime that year. Third round pick needs to start by year 2. Fourth round on down, you need to hit one diamond in the rough. And for every time you miss in 1, 2, or 3, you got to hit with somebody else down low, right?
So
they're not doing that.
That's 4 starters every draft. Then
you control people for 4 years, and you have 22 starters. And you have to turn your roster over every 4 years. On average, you need to replace 5.5 starters a year.
But I'm saying I just want to make
it's pretty simple math on how many you got to get.
But your grading curve for a good draft is to have 4 starters in the draft.
I said the goal. Yeah, that should to ultimately have, yes, that's what you need to be trying to get out of it. Then free agency comes and you bail out. That is what you try to achieve. Are you going to do it? No, most years you're going to come up short. When you have that magic draft like they had 3 years ago, that bails you out and that picks you up for other years where you've missed. But it also means you've got a lot of guys coming due at the same time. But that's what you need to try to do, particularly if you're going to make people the highest paid at their position everywhere. Yes, that is the only way it's going to work, or they are going to crash as we're watching the 49ers crash right now and having to trade a 28-year-old Deebo Samuel. I know he's oft injured, but when he's right, he's a difference maker. And they don't want to be getting rid of Deebo Samuel, but they have put everything into the cap, and now they got to pay the quarterback. So this is where you end up. Like, this is where the Chiefs will end up. If they have to throw more picks at offensive line and keep walking away from them, they're not getting starters in other spots. Yes, it will. That's part of the reason why they're spending all this money on these other guys, because they're not hitting anywhere.
Yeah, I just think 3 starters is a really good draft. If you can get 3 starters out of the draft, then you've had a good draft.
I think he means over like a 3 or 4 year period.
He thinks I thought he was just
every year on average. What you need if you're not going to. The whole point of this was our draft is our free agency. So if you're not going to spend on people outside, you're turning over your roster every 4 years. There are 8 or 9 guys. I mean, rule of thumb, you should say you could say at least 4, right? And if not 5, but it's probably more like 4 to 4.5 because you can keep some of your guys. But look back 4 years ago. I mean, who is still on this team that was there 4 years ago? Now you get Justin Reid in free agency. You do pick up guys along the way that can get it done. But it is just simple math. There are 22 starters and you control players basically for 4 years. It's not something you want to do. It's something you have to do. It's simple math.
Well, but your math equation is missing the fact that you retain some of your old players. There is
not many of them. Look at how many guys are on this team that were on, and how many starters are still starting for this team that were starting 4 years ago. If you look at it, you quickly learn that there's like how many guys are still on the roster that were playing for the Super Bowl, and Harrison Butker and James Winchester are not in the 22. There were 6 guys. Derek Nottie doesn't play.
From 19.
You get down to where there are 3 guys from 2019. Three MFing guys.
No, there's more than 3 guys.
That actually are contributors, that actually do something, that are what we would call starters.
Okay, so you said 3 guys.
I said there are 22 starters, which is the whole beginning of this conversation.
I think Derek Nottie or Mike Pennell started that game in 19 too, right?
And they're not now. I mean, listen. Okay, if that's the bailout, is Derek Nottie still here? Then I'm
just saying, like, getting
we're talking about different worlds.
I'm just saying, the grading curve for a draft is insane. If you need to get 4 starters out of every,
it's not insane. It's just the reality of what you have to do.
It's not like you are forgetting. Like they do retain players. They sign guys to 1-year deals all the time. They sign guys in free agency like all the time. Like go through that same exercise and see how many of those guys are drafted players. I mean, they do sign Joe Tooney. They do sign all
the comment what we're working from, Sam, is Brett Veach said
Yes.
Our draft will be our free agency. And I'm pointing out that if that is going to be what you're going to do, because you're going to retain guys at the highest level, this is the success rate you will have to have in the draft to make it work. It should be your goal every year, right? And an unattainable one, yes, most years it's unattainable. It should be your goal. But if this is what you're going to do, is to keep signing the most expensive guy at his position all the time, this is the success rate you're going to have. And I'm with you. You can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through their draft right now, and 2022 was their only draft. 21, they had, I guess you could call Noah Gray a starter if you say you start 2 tight ends, but otherwise, I mean, God, you gotta trace all the way back to 2016 since the last time they had 4 starters in one draft.
Yes.
It's an unreasonable bar as well.
And it's why their line sucks. I mean, it's why they lost the Super Bowl, because they have not
Super
done
Bowl.
it.
They're the second best team in the NFL this year, right?
Okay. I mean, but yes. Is the arrow pointing up or down for this team? And then we'll take a break. Is the arrow in your mind right now for this football team pointing up or down?
I think they'll be a Super Bowl contender next year as well.
Is the arrow pointing up or down? Are they getting better? Or
I mean,
worse?
how difficult? Like that's just the framing of that question is insane, because like you either have to have
It's
a
not
first or
insane, you
second
just
round.
don't like it because it doesn't make your point.
There is no
All right,
up.
I'll ask Jeff.
They made the Super Bowl. There is
Jeff.
no up from the Super Bowl.
Jeff, is the arrow on this team pointing up or down?
Down.
Yeah, right now it's pointing down.
It could
Travis
change,
Kelce
but right now
is
it's
36 years old. They're going to cut their right tackle. They don't have an answer at left tackle. They're expensive as hell, and the part of the offensive line that doesn't matter. They're going to have to cut probably Joe Tooney to make all this work. Chris Jones is on the downslope of his career. It's okay to say guys are getting old and they have issues.
I don't see the relation to what I said about needing 4 starters out of the draft versus whether or not
I just asked you the simple question: is the arrow pointing up or down?
What's the
relation? It's scary to say it, but it's pointing down. Now, maybe they can turn it and turn the tide, and maybe they can get some free agents, and maybe they'll have a great draft. But there is no way you can look at this team the way it is currently constructed, where all these guys that they have been the darling of the under 25s and the under 26 list, they're not anymore. They are becoming older, and they are becoming more expensive, and they're becoming more dependent on a handful of players. Listen.
Well, and I'll back this up. And just because you say it's down now, at this time last year, it was down for Buffalo. It was down for Buffalo. No, but it was down for Buffalo at this time last year. It was down for the Chiefs.
It was down for the Chiefs.
Down for the Rams.
You guys were calling.
Yeah.
Jeff was saying it was down for the Chiefs last year. They still made the Super Bowl. I mean, let's get through a draft before we decide whether or not this team's going to be any good, right?
I asked for you can't evaluate now. Why are we so adverse to evaluating what it is going into the draft?
I don't look at this team. My point in the unfairness of the question is, like, they made the freaking Super Bowl last year. Every team that makes the Super Bowl every year, I would never say that it's pointing up the next year. I would never say that it's pointing up the following year after they've made the Super Bowl.
The long term for this, the 3 years from now for this team, it is not pointing up. Forget about just tying into next year. Over the next 3 years, what they have going for them is Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid if he's still on top of his game. Those are the
good places to start, aren't they?
They're great places to start, but you're going to need more around them. All right, let's take a
absolutely, yeah.
We'll shift gears. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, always one of our great sponsors here at the Red Gold and Bold. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let Gann educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warning. Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find Gann online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Northland Injury Law, Kansas City's Google 5-star rated personal injury lawyers, serving KC for more than 40 years, voted Kansas City's #1 accident lawyers, helping people with serious injuries from car accidents, work accidents, falls, and other personal injuries. Northland Injury Law doesn't get paid unless they get money for their client. Don't wait. Get compensated now. If you have a case, text HURT to 22222. That's HURT to 22222. Or call 816-400-HURT. That's 816-400-4878. The choice of a lawyer is an important one and should not be based solely upon advertisements. All right, let's talk about the Super Bowl and what it meant. Is the Super Bowl, Jeff, such an overwhelming game that if you don't perform well, you should take the results of that Super Bowl, and that should mean more than the previous 19 games?
I think you have to be careful with that. I think for the Chiefs, I think in the grand scheme of things, you shouldn't take one game and have it be evidence of what you are as a team in entirety. But for the Chiefs, I think it should have been a reality check about where you are, and as we just said in the previous segment, what you can do in the coming years. I think they were able to manage a lot of problems this year, and they deserve credit for that, no question. They had a great season. They went very far. They had a chance to get a three-peat. But I think what happened in that game had to tell them, like, we have to really think long and hard about how we're building this roster moving forward, because it can't just – Patrick Mahomes is a great place to start, but that game showed you, just as the Washington game showed, the NFC Championship game, that having a great quarterback isn't enough when you're playing great teams. And so every year you're going to find a handful of teams that can do what Philadelphia did in that game. If they hit it just right and they build it just right, because these teams have been building for the last 4 or 5 years to beat the Chiefs. And some have broken through. Some are close to breaking through. But that has to be your reality, that just getting by, winning close games, finding a way to eke out things, getting some good breaks along the way, that's not a sustainable plan. A sustainable plan is what they did in 2022 and with the draft, and they got to get back to doing that again.
Yeah. How about you, Sam? How much should the Super Bowl be what guides them? And is putting the franchise tag on Trey Smith, who presumably you could have signed for less than that this past year, is that not just perhaps an overreaction to what happened in the Super Bowl?
I don't think that is as much Super Bowl related as people are making out to be. But look, Jeff made the comment that, like, eking games out is not a sustainable strategy. I agree with that, but that was the regular season strategy. And I think a lot of what came out of the Super Bowl, it just was the fact that they covered up a lot of that stuff in the regular season. So if they needed that lesson of actually losing a game to provide their weaknesses, then okay, that can be a way where the Super Bowl does outweigh the previous 19 games. But the Chiefs were already there. Like, they knew they needed help on the offensive line. But I think the main lesson that they need to take from this game is what's most likely to be replicated from what the Eagles did is not their roster building, because it would take you, 3 years to be able to try and replicate what the Eagles did with their roster in terms of the talent they stacked at every position. I think what the Chiefs should most learn from that game is the thing that's most likely to be replicated is the scheme stuff. You know, the only rushing four, not get out of your rushing lanes. And that was something else, again, that they should have learned in the regular season. But once you get your butts kicked in the Super Bowl, then it's really reinforced that this is the scheme that's sticking around for 17 regular season games and how many other playoff games you're fortunate enough to face. So do you need different personnel to beat that scheme? Do you need to change the way you're thinking offensively to be able to beat that scheme? Whatever your answers is, like, that's what the Super Bowl to me illuminated more than anything.
Interesting. I think you know, your losses always are going to guide you more. Like, when people have found your weaknesses, that's going to be what you look at. I think you do have to dissect that game and say, though, were we exposed, right? Like, you know, is that something that 3 or 4 other teams could have done to us as well? You know, I think that's something that is kind of interesting. What would have happened if they'd played Baltimore? What if they played Denver? You know, like Jeff brought up the point. We had the comments from Sean Payton that we felt good if we got by Buffalo, which, by the way, they didn't come close to getting by Buffalo. But if we gotten by Buffalo, we felt pretty good about the next one. Was a shot at the Chiefs that they felt pretty good. Well, is the recipe out there for beating them? I think to a degree it is. I mean, I think there are some elements of what Philadelphia did that many teams cannot come close to doing because they don't have the personnel. But I think there were some things that were shown. It was a bad day all around on a lot of levels, and we've said it. I think the Chiefs out of 10 win 3, maybe 4 of those games, but I do think there were some things that were exposed. And so, no, it shouldn't count more than the other 19 games, but it should count more than any one game, right?
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree with that, right, Jeff?
Yeah. Well, and look, I know on this podcast, this fan base, it's often great company to talk about the AFC contenders and how they just can't find a way to get past the Chiefs. But if you really look at what these teams have been doing over the last few years, they have been building, especially on defense, rosters that are very similar to what the Eagles have put together. You look at what Denver has with Zach Allen and Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper and Surtain and Riley Moss. They have the framework of that type of defense. You look at the Chargers, what they've done. They had one of the best defenses in the league this past year. They loaded up on corners. They had a ton of pass rushers. The Texans had a game defensively against the Chiefs in the playoffs. If they had the kind of offensive firepower that the Eagles had, they'd probably win that game or a better offensive line. And so I would be very careful about dismissing some of these teams as not being able to get past the Chiefs because, as you just said, that framework is out there now. That blueprint is out there, and these teams that they're able to, some of these teams like the Chargers and the Broncos and the Texans, that they're able to build their offenses better. They become scarier than the Bills and the Ravens do. To be honest with you,
And that should be a favor to the Chiefs because I agree with everything Jeff just said.
What should be a favor to the Chiefs?
That the blueprint's out there. Like they know how teams are going to play them next year because it wasn't just the Eagles. You know, the Jeff's right. The Broncos tried to play them this way, and they were successful. The Chiefs needed to block a game-winning field goal in at the end of regulation to win on their home field against the Broncos. When you look at the teams that have given the Chiefs problems in the postseason over the last 3 years and the regular season after the last 3 years, a lot of them are using pretty similar blueprints. Like this should be a favor to the Chiefs that there's I talked a lot of last offseason about the Houston Texans. The reason I wasn't as high on the Texans as much as other people's because I said the Texans still don't know how they're going to play CJ Stroud in his second year yet. The Chiefs know how everyone's going to play their offense, how everyone's going to play Patrick Mahomes this upcoming year. This should be an advantage they have this offseason that they can go into a season and say, we know what defenses are going to try and take away from us this year.
I will leave you with this, that I think, the Baltimore Ravens did not take advantage of Kingsley Suamataia. Why? Because there wasn't a blueprint. They were the first one to have to kind of probe and prod and try to figure out what was wrong with the Chiefs. But damn, once the Bengals showed it, that was it. Man, like we can't go here anymore. And Wanya Morris didn't get exposed right away. It took a little time. Then they went, okay, this is how it is. I mean, I do think along the way, you can kind of cover it up if they don't attack you in those spots, right? But once the spots get shown, then here they come. We've seen it on film. We know how to do it. And so I think from that standpoint, like, again, I'll come back to any loss, unless you're just dropping the ball all over the place, knocking it up in the air for interceptions. But if you're just physically beaten in spots, then your weaknesses are exposed and you've got to find a way to get better. They have to be better at left tackle, right? I think that's clear. And the question is how they're going to get there.
Right? Yeah, because they came away from the Tampa Bay Super Bowl saying, well, if we had our tackles, it'd been a different game, right? They came away from this one saying we had a lot of players out there, and it was pretty ugly.
Yeah, it was. Nick Bolton is probably the next biggest name, the next biggest impact player on the Chiefs roster. That's a free agent. What kind of interest are you hearing, Sam, from the Combine that Nick Bolton's going to be getting?
Nick Bolton, I think, is a tough one to figure out. I mean, look, he's only 24 years old. He's not going to turn 25 until next week. I think that's going to be really attractive to teams. We know that Nick Bolton does have, strengths and weaknesses in his game. But if you give him a 4-year deal, even you're only paying him through age 28. I think that's going to be attractive to teams. But I mentioned this on a past podcast. I could see an instance in which Nick Bolton's market does not necessarily develop into one of these, highly paid linebacker, top 5 of the market linebackers, in which case that would be a scenario where I think the Chiefs would still be interested. But if I had to put a number on, I'm saying, 3 years, a real 3-year deal, so whether or not that includes like a dummy 4-year deal or not, but what really amounts to a 3-year deal for somewhere around 35 to 40, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think those numbers sound good, but the question is there a team that needs defense that has a lot of cap that says, okay, we'll overpay? Because I think there are intangibles. We've talked about the intangibles of Travis Kelce. I think there are intangibles that come with Nick Bolton, right?
Yeah.
Like I think there is something to a guy who will thump you, right? That jacks people up, that gets people fired up. He's smart, he's tough, he plays through injuries. Like there's a lot of reason to go extra. And like you said, Sam, he's really, really young. So I think there is going to be a pretty good market. He's not Roquan Smith. He's not going to get $100 million because he doesn't play off the ball. He's not as diverse. You know, he doesn't cover as well. He's limited in what he can do. I mean, I heard Jeremiah Trotter, Jeff, you mentioned him. He's kind of old school Jeremiah. He's old school middle linebacker type. But I think his coverage, he's not so bad that he's chasing a guy. Like I remember the Chiefs, I don't know who it was, if it was Glenn Cadrez or who it was, like would just get beat in coverage and then couldn't make the tackle. Like he's at least around to make a tackle. And I think he's a high energy guy and is a smart guy. And I think they do a pretty good job of scheming with him. I don't think the Chiefs can find a way to get it done, though. Whatever the best offer is, Jeff, they can't possibly be going to sign Nick Bolton as well, are they?
No, I think Nick Bolton, the only way he winds up back here is if he gets mistreated in the market. And you're right. I don't see that happening. I was surprised looking at Pro Football Focus and their rankings. Now, maybe that's just off their analytics and their own research and not any insider info. They had him second among inside linebackers after Dre Greenlaw, and they had Zach Bond sixth. Zach Bond was a first-team All-Pro player who people are saying is going to get a pretty nice payday out there. But the numbers, Sam, throughout, they do make a lot of sense. And let's not forget, when they went and got Anthony Hitchens, that was a similar type player to bring into this defense that was really struggling. And he was a limited player, and he got paid a lot more money than people thought he was going to get paid because of what he brought to the table. And I certainly think that a guy like Nick Bolton could go someplace at the Raiders, if the Cowboys, I know he's a Texas guy, if they want to make a play for him. There's tons of teams out there who need that kind of tone setter leader in a locker room.
One team that's interesting to me that it's a playoff team, so I think you'd be attracted to is like a team like the Commanders. That's
exactly where I was going.
I would think that Bobby Wagner is probably not going to be back. In which case, they sought that type of personality in the locker room. I could see them seeking that type of personality. Again, Jeff, I agree with you that Zach Bond's definitely a better player than Nick Bolton. He is going to be 29, so he is going to be 4 years older than Nick Bolton. So that might play into the how much would you give this guy over 3 years, for example.
Yeah, I think all you got to do is look at the teams that have all the cap room. I mean, you know, New England's got a ton of cap space. Yeah. They're trying to get a new culture going. You know, is that something that Mike Vrabel says, okay, I can Swiss Army knife him? You mentioned Vegas. Arizona has got, a lot of cap space. The Chargers, Vikings, Bears. I mean, those are the top ends. If they're looking to change the culture of a team, he's a guy that not just can play, but he can change the culture. How about Justin Reid, Jeff? What does Justin Reid get offered on the open market? And is there any shot that the Chiefs are going to be bringing him back? He's young for a third contract because he's only 28.
Yeah. And like you've heard numbers around $10 million a year for him, which is surprising given the safety market when you're talking about guys like Talanoa Hufanga being out there and Justin Simmons and
but he's ready to play. Like that's the one thing with Justin Reid. He doesn't miss games. Like Hufanga is wonderful when he plays. He just doesn't play that much.
Yeah. I think for the same reasons as Nick Bolton, I think he'll find a market on a team that is looking for a leader in the secondary. He has his limitations as well, but he's a smart guy. I think it was Eric Mangini I saw on TV talking about this. When you're talking about taking these guys away from the Chiefs defense, these guys are great communicators. They're very smart. And so to be able to run Spagnuolo's system, that obviously hurts the Chiefs if they lose these two guys, but it makes them more attractive in other places where you're trying to get a defense going or you're trying to do more complicated stuff. So that money takes years time, but I would be surprised if he got it if agency plays out.
Yeah, what do you think about Reid, Sam? What do you think he's looking at when he gets out there?
I think something similar to the deal he signed with the Chiefs. I mean, maybe adjusted for inflation over the past 3 years to where maybe you could get him to, the mid 30s or something like that over 3 years. But you're right, Sren. You pay him 28, 29 and age 30 seasons. The quality about Justin Reid that I think is going to be most attractive to other teams is his versatility. He lined up in the box more frequently than any safety in the entire NFL. He plays the slot a decent amount, which can be related. There could be a snap that charges both. I'm saying he's a pretty good tackler too. I think he's a versatile player, and therefore he could potentially fit into different schemes. And look, I mean, when Justin Reid came to Kansas City, he mentioned how complicated Spagnuolo's defense was, that he'd never seen a defense that complicated. He played for multiple defensive coordinators, obviously then in college as well. And I do agree with Jeff. Like, the reason the Chiefs went number 2 in the league in defense a year ago and still finished top 10 this year was their knowledge of Spags' defense showed its effect, that they were not learning the defense anymore, that they had it down and they were able to layer on. If you lose these last 2 players we're talking about, you could see, the effects of a team that's all of a sudden learning a defense again.
Yeah. And then that sets them back a little bit. The offense better be there to pick up the slack. We're always brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete and Besame Wellness.
Besame Wellness for all your cannabis needs. With fast, easy, and discreet delivery, you can enjoy the same deals you enjoy in-store, but delivered to your home or office. Even same day. Restrictions may apply. Any questions? Let Besame's top-rated customer service team assist you. And this Chief season, don't miss a minute of the game with no delivery fees on game days. And when the home team wins, so do you. Use promo code 3PEAT and receive some extra free goodies with your next Besame order. Don't forget, you can still use promo code podcast25 to save 25% on your entire order for online delivery or at any of their 5 area Besame locations.
Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let Gann educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. With free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty, Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find Gann online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. Sam, you were in Indianapolis. Tell us, who looks like a fit? What are you hearing as far as players that could be help for the Chiefs?
Well, I think their best fits are going to be defensive linemen. And I know that's not going to be the news people want to hear because the need at left tackle is so glaring, but they do need an interior defensive lineman. And this is about as strong a class since Brett Veach has been the GM of interior linemen. So I think whatever happens ahead of them, when they get to their pick at 31, they're going to be looking at their board and it's going to say draft a defensive lineman in this spot. And so I look at the offensive tackles that I think could potentially intrigue them in that spot. Ariante Ursary, the left tackle out of Minnesota, had a really good combine. He tested well. He's athletic. I thought his, it's bizarre the way we start talking about guys' body parts in these segments, but I was a little bit stunned. His arms were only 33 inches, considering he's 6'6". And I'm interested. I don't know what they think of the.
By the way, 33 inches is not short arms. I think mine are 16 inches. I don't know what they are, but like we are talking about the freaks amongst freaks.
100%. But that's what they're being compared to at the draft.
Yes.
But look, some people's floor for that position is 33, and he had 33 and 8, and he's 6'6". I can't emphasize that enough. That I don't think you would look at a guy 6'6" and think, okay, do we have to worry about his arm size? I'm also interested to what they think of this Oregon left tackle. I know going into the draft, they didn't have nearly as many first-round grades on tackles as they did a year ago, when none of them dropped to him anyway. But those are 2 guys I think could be in play if they like them. And Ursary in particular tested pretty well at the combine.
I think Logan Brown did himself a lot of favors. The Kansas offensive tackle, he came in at 6'6" and 3/8 and 33 and 7/8 inches arms, almost 34 where you want it. Same thing for Anthony Belton of NC State, 6'6", 33 and 7/8. I mean, that gets them close to where they can at least have a little bit more comfort there. If for that stat, that's big. If you want to know who was the Mr. Long Arms, Holland Pierce of Rutgers, 6'8" and 3/8, 341, 36-inch arms, but is projected as a day 3 guy. So you want a project for them to put in there? I mean,
I'm
Trent
sure.
Brown.
I'm sure Ethan Driscoll had long arms too, right?
Let me see if I can look it up. I mean, he wasn't
30,
drafted.
30, 35 and 3/8.
Okay, so that's hence why they signed him. I mean, that's their passion. They have a passion for long-armed guys.
Seren, I mentioned it to you on the show today. The most correlated combine data point with offensive tackles versus how much they actually play in the NFL is actually the 40-yard dash. And it's why this Mimbu guy, this Armand Mimbu guy from Mizzou, I think like priced himself out of falling to number 31 to the Chiefs. But Ursary ran really well with the 40 as well. I think he was like at 501. He ran pretty well too. So that's why he's a guy. I don't know what the Chiefs think of his actual on-field tape. God forbid we think the on-field tape is important, but I don't know what they think of that. But I think he tested pretty well if they did like what his tape showed.
I'll throw out my Logan Brown stat, 1.75 in the first 10 yards of the 40-yard dash, which is another one that's big because obviously they're not going to go 40 yards very far. Ran a 5.18 is pretty good, but you're right. Ursary just barely over 5.0 at 5.01. That's a hell of a time. You want another fast 40 time? Jonah Savania from Arizona also broke 5. He was at 4.95. Jeff, you got anything? Anyone you're liking?
I actually stayed away from offensive tackles just because I knew you guys probably would be heavy on that, and I don't think there's going to be one at 31 that's going to be attractive to them. So I was thinking defensive line as well, and I like the kid from Ohio State, Tyleek Williams, the defensive tackle, but I know Landon Jackson was the guy I put down on my list, the edge rusher from Arkansas. 6'6", 260, and blew it up. Like ran a 4.68 40, almost 11-foot broad jump, and he had a big Senior Bowl, had a strip sack in the Senior Bowl. He just screams Steve Spagnuolo pass rusher, and so I would think he's really helped himself at the combine and could, this team still needs defensive line help all the way around. Anybody who can rush the passer should be attractive to them, and this guy was slated to be an early second, late first round pick anyway.
Yeah, I saw Landon Jackson still listed in the second round, and with a 4.68 40, I think it's the second highest 40 or a second highest vertical jump of anybody over 260 pounds ever.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, that he just screams Steve Spagnuolo.
Yeah.
There's one player who I chatted with at the combine, Darius Alexander, potential late first round pick, could potentially be there. A kid out of Toledo. But he told me that he met formally with the Chiefs. Obviously, you only get so many of these formal visits at the combine. I think it's like 45. And so, but the surprising part of that to me was the Chiefs seek youth in the draft. We talked about Nick Bolton's age. We talked about Justin Reid's age when they signed him out of free agency. Like, they've made one of the biggest differences to me between John Dorsey and Brett Veach is the priority of youth. I think that's been a major shift with the Chiefs since that change was made. Darius Alexander is going to be 25 as a rookie. And so that surprises me that he might be a guy that he literally was a guy they were looking at the combine.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can see the types that they go for, along both lines of scrimmage. But I think line of scrimmage is going to be where they're going to be looking for sure. Let's talk a little bit about, Travis Kelce being ill in the Super Bowl. Jeff, he made a point to tell people this. Why? Why now? What's the reason?
Veach made a point to tell people.
Yeah, Brett Veach. Yeah, I hope I didn't say Travis Kelce. Brett Veach made a point to say Travis Kelce was ill at the Super Bowl. Why and why now?
Yeah, I don't really understand that either, because if you're going to say it, I think you should be very definitive about what he was dealing with. Like, was it the flu? Was it a cold? Whatever, allergies? I don't know. But it kind of felt as if you're saying it to explain that wasn't who we know. It wasn't what he can be. And that doesn't really jive because he didn't play well in the previous game, the AFC Championship game. And I don't think Veach is the kind of guy who wants to make excuses or feel like he's got to go out there and defend Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce's a big boy. But I did think it was I don't think it was helpful in that way. I don't think him being, if he was ill, I don't think him being healthy was going to change the outcome of that game.
Yeah, it's puzzling to me. I mean, it almost seemed like it was like he's coming back, we're keeping him, and so we want to make clear he's better than what he showed his last time. right? And that becomes concerning. Listen, I've said it when it comes to Kansas basketball. Bill Self is quoting how many league titles they've won over the last, 21 years. And it's like, okay, because this year's not very good. You're citing what it's been for 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a little bit of, and I think you do that when you're afraid. I think when you're like, okay, I'm not confident I have the answer right now. Not that these, wandering around and has no clue, but you're kind of making excuses, right? That's basically what that is. And so that's a little bit concerning. You're making a move for Trey Smith kind of because you haven't hit on 4 different draft picks over the last 2 years. You're keeping Travis Kelce because why? You just gave Noah Gray $18 million. I mean, I know Travis Kelce's a wonderful player, and I'm open to the fact that he maybe went to them and said, look, I was chasing my gal all summer. I wasn't in the kind of shape I need to be in. I can do better. I'll be better. That's all great. I give him every opportunity. He's such a great player to be better next year. But, what'd you give Noah Gray 3 for 18, right? Like these are the reasons, this has got to make sense. There's got to be an overall plan, and then you got to stick to the plan. And so, yeah, it is a little puzzling. I mean, I think, and part of it is just maybe natural. Hey, we had a tough game in the Super Bowl, right? Like, I don't know. It is a bit of a red flag for me, though. Go ahead, Jeff. I cut you off.
Oh, no. I thought Sam was going to say something.
Oh.
No, I didn't read as much into it as you guys did, but I would have loved to a follow-up question have been asked because Travis Kelce had been available to us during the week and certainly didn't appear to have that during the week. So I would have loved to have followed. Was the guy up all night? Was he thrown up in the morning of the day of the game? I would have liked, to learn more details about what that was.
Well, my Kelce personal life insider, also known as my wife, who listens to his podcast and follows.
Does she listen to our podcast?
No, never. Follows Taylor Swift and all those kind of things. Like, he went on a double date, 2 days before that. And I'm like, well, people do get sick the night before, right? It can happen, So, yeah, she had his timeline of what his movements were.
Did you see him after the game, Sam? Did you see him?
He was only in the he was only in the locker room. He wasn't part of the group that came to those small podiums afterwards. So I did not.
Which would kind of fit with a guy who they're like, look, you got to get out of here.
Yeah.
It would kind of fit along those lines. All right, we'll have to save Jared Allen for our next podcast. We'll talk about his Hall of Fame candidacy. We'll talk about the fact that Gann Asphalt and Concrete is your one-stop shop for all things parking lot. One contractor, all things parking lot. You can find them online at GannAsphalt.com. Our friends at Northland Injury Law. If you have a case, if you've been injured in an accident, text HURT to 22222 or call 816-400-HURT. And, of course, our friends at Besame Wellness. Use promo code PODCAST25 to save 25% on your entire order at Besame Wellness. For Jeff Chadilla from the NFL Network, NFL.com, Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star, I'm Seren Petra saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Red Gold.